You know, one of the topics I've been hearing a lot about lately is doubt in the Christian life. We hear a lot about it in social media, people have written about it. I want to get your reflections on sort of two categories I see out there of extremes to avoid. One is, I call them doubt shamers, where if you show any doubt or ask any hard questions, you're sort of labeled as a bad Christian and should feel bad about wondering about these things. We don't ask questions around here, you just believe. And then I have another category that I see out there called doubt celebrators, where they almost make it sound like the greatest Christian virtue is to doubt everything all the time. And I think both those are pulling people back and forth. And when I think about how to help people with doubt, I'm like, I want to point out those two categories for people. Are you seeing those same?
So one of the things I talk to people about is what you're experiencing is, in some sense, normal in a secular age.
And maybe even more normal now than it ever was.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the type of doubt Luther's having, for instance, it's a doubt of, could he be righteous before holy God?
Right.
He wasn't doubting the entire system.
Right.
Is there a God? It
Right.
was pretty much assumed in the Western world. It was built into the structures of everyday existence in a way that God isn't now. And so when we think about doubt, one of the first things I want to do is help people think through kind of how our cultural context has changed how we believe.
Right.
And why we doubt, maybe even more than we used to.
Yeah, and with the advent of social media, you have access to so many different worldviews now that you never would have had access to before. So there's lots of prompts for people to doubt. I tell people all the time when I talk to people who doubt, look, this doesn't make you a bad Christian. It doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. And one other thing I point out, particularly on the doubt shaming side, trying to avoid that, is to remind people how compassionate Christ was on doubters. He called them to faith, yes. He called them to trust, but he also was very patient with them. I think of the line in Jude, have mercy on those who doubt. It's such a beautiful, short, little poignant line that I remind people of to tell them, look, obviously you want to push against your doubts. You want to fight against them. But God is such a gracious, patient God who understands the struggles we have. And is so compassionate about it. So when I point people back to Jesus and they see Jesus' compassion on doubt, I think that's such a balm for people who struggle.
Yeah, and part of the reaction against the kind of fear of doubt or the agonizing kind of when you're dealing with doubt and people are trying to be compassionate is to say, hey, actually, you can achieve certainty if you just follow X, Y, and Z. And what I've seen, if you go that route, if you just say kind of rationally, we can just build our way to some kind of epistemological certainty, what often happens, a well-meaning youth pastor, well-meaning discipler will actually end up, in the long run, discouraging that person because they never actually achieve that kind of rational certainty by the means that they're suggesting they can. And so we need to say, okay, reason's important, evidence is important, we need to read good books, we need to think well, but we also need to be realistic about the kind of confidence. We can have confidence, but not some kind of absolute certainty. So the bar's up here, and then when the evidence doesn't quite get there for them because they are reading the counter arguments, they're not in a kind of existential crisis because of it.
No, that's good. Yeah, you don't want to sort of set them up for failure by convincing them that you can have this sort of pristine level of faith that never questions anything. And I think sometimes we do that. You know, I always see that in apologetics is someone expresses a doubt and they back up the dump truck of data and just pour it on this poor soul. And it's not as if a person never needs their questions answered. Sometimes people doubt because they just never heard a good argument. Sometimes they doubt because they've never had their questions answered about something like the Da Vinci Code, right? And you can quickly dispel those things. But for most people, just dumping a bunch of data on them doesn't help. And I think part of that reason is because doubt can sometimes be more complex than just simply, I don't have the right information.
That's right.
There seems so many little layers that go into why a person doubts. It could be as simple as, you know, the people I know who are Christians are really just sort of mean. How could Christianity be true? It could be as simple as that. I also see a lot of people doubt because of suffering in their life or in the life of a loved one. And so that's not so much something you can solve simply by saying, well, the historical evidence for the resurrection is really good. There's so many more layers to it.
Yeah, and so thinking about the Christian life as a pilgrimage, as the ancients have done, as our forefathers in the faith have done, seeing it as a pilgrimage where we're not going to be completely righteous in this life, we're not going to be completely sanctified, we're also, especially in a secular age, going to continue to deal with doubts at different times. So seeing this as part of the journey And we serve a God who is big enough even to use, yes, our suffering for good in unexpected ways, but also perhaps even our doubts for good.
Yeah.
And that we have to trust more on him. We have to trust in a community of others to help us through this. So I think if we see doubt as even not a good thing, but something that our good God can actually use in our life,
Yeah.
rather than simply something, again, not valorizing it, not saying we want it out, but our God is sovereign even over that, and we'll use it in our lives.
Yeah, I look back on prior iterations of Christian apologetics, and I wonder if sometimes the desire to reassure believers of the truth makes sometimes Christian apologists to be a little overly certain about everything in a way that's probably not realistic, and does a little bit of what you said earlier. It sets people up for a fall later when they realize they can't achieve that sort of certainty. And what might be helpful is for even scholars to say sometimes they don't know.
Yeah.
For scholars even to admit these are complicated things. For scholars to acknowledge sometimes, I wrestle with stuff. I wonder if that could almost like diffuse the whole thing, like just lets the air out of the whole concern. Because once a young believer sees a scholar say, yeah, things can be hard and I struggle, like, well, if that's true for him, then I shouldn't be so shocked that I struggle.
Yeah, and I think it's a kind of non-anxious posture, non-anxious presence in the midst of someone's doubt. And I think that what that means for ministers, for people trying to help, is that number one, we've wrestled with our own doubt. We're willing to actually show people our own wounds, our own struggles, issues that are hard for us.
Yeah.
And yet how that hasn't completely derailed our faith either.
Right.
That there are good reasons to believe, and also that Christianity is this about this story and about this person and about this encounter with Christ, rather than simply a rational system. Rationality is really important, but it's more than that. It's an encounter with the risen Christ. So I think sometimes in apologetics, we're so focused on the evidence, which again is important, but we forget what's at the heart of the Christian faith, which is a person, not a logical system.
I think that's probably where all this leads, doesn't it? Which is that the solution to doubt has to be relationally engaging with the person of Christ, the living Christ, and realizing that he's real. And if you think about it, that's the most assurance you can have, is God's own voice, reassuring us that he's true and he's real.
I remember one student who came to me and said, was just sharing with me her struggles, and I said, how are things going with the church? And she said, I stopped going months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, instead what I'm doing is I'm using the internet to look up answers, and I'm going to professors and the smartest people I know to find the answers.
Right.
And I said, I'm flattered that you've come to me and for answers, and that's important. But if you've given up on church, part of actually the Christian life is stepping into it, not just looking at Christianity or looking through it, but stepping into it and adopting the practices so that we experience the risen Christ through communion with the people of God, through the word being preached, through church, good old-fashioned church and worship, and not to make that too glib, just go to church and worship.
Right.
But I do think that needs to be part of our advice.
No, that's actually one of the classic pieces of advice I give people who come to me about doubt is, you don't want to deal with this alone. Mm-hmm. You got to be in Christian community. I call it my horror movie advice. Horror movie advice is, if you ever watch a scary movie, the protagonist always makes a mistake. He goes off in the dark alone, and everyone is screaming at the TV, don't do it, and they always do it. But it's like that in doubt. You want to go off alone in the dark. And I always say, come into God's people and into community, into the light, stay in a group, and that's the best way to deal with it.